guys. So this is Unit 4, lecture. Oh no, I can't remember. I think it's 6. I know we're on chapter 15, section 2. No, section 3 in the book. If you're reading the book, this is chapter 15, section 3. We're going to do section 3 and section 5. Okay, so we're going to talk about India post World War I. And remember, post means after. So we're talking about India after World War I. So during World War I, India had sent 1 million soldiers to fight for Britain. Because remember, India is a British colony right now. And when India sent those 1 million soldiers to fight in Britain's war, they said, we want more freedom. They didn't necessarily say we want freedom, we want to be independent. They just said, we want to be able to have more control over ourselves. And Britain agreed to that. Britain was like, yeah, send us 1 million soldiers and we'll give you more freedoms after the war. What do you think they did? They didn't give them any more freedoms. So now we're in post-World War I. India's angry because Britain lied to them. And along comes this charismatic, that means, I don't know, really friendly, the people really like them, charismatic leader. And his name is Gandhi. His first name was Mahatma Gandhi, but everybody just knows him as Gandhi. So that's all you need to know. Gandhi was a guy that had he was born and raised in India. When he was 19, he went to England to study law. Just like we've talked about this a whole bunch of times, of a certain class, children of a certain class often went back to whatever their colonizing country was for education. So that's what he did. And then after he studied law, he moved to South Africa. At this time, that was happening with lots of Indians. Indians were moving to South Africa because they could make more money. So he went there and he lived in South Africa for 20 years. And he spent those 20 years fighting discrimination against Indians in South Africa. Because in South Africa, people were really, really racist against Indians. So Gandhi spent these 20 years fighting discrimination against Indians in South Africa. After 20 years, he moved back to India. And when he moved back to India, he became the leader of the Congress Party. And hopefully you remember before there was the Indian National Congress. I talked about this a couple of lectures ago, where this political party formed and they didn't really have any real power because the British ruled India, but they still made a political party. Well, this is the same party. It's the Indian National Congress, but they call themselves the Congress Party. So the Gandhi quickly becomes the leader of the Congress Party because he's intelligent, he's well-spoken, the people like him, he rises to power quickly. And Gandhi is a big supporter of an Indian term ahimsa. And ahimsa means nonviolence and reverence for all living beings. Reverence means respect, to respect all living beings, and nonviolence. These were really important to Gandhi. And he had a bunch of influences. He had some Western influences and he had some Indian influences. Like this term right here is an Indian term, but he really liked Christian love. The idea, because maybe not all of you know this, in the Christian faith, love is really, really accented a lot. Love thy neighbor, love this, love that, love and kindness are really important in Christianity. And he liked that a lot. And then there was also a famous philosopher and poet named Henry David Thoreau. Thoreau, that's not right. It's Thoreau. Henry David Thoreau. It's a very, very famous philosopher and poet. And Henry David Thoreau wrote about civil disobedience. Civil disobedience is to refuse to obey a law that is unjust. You need to know that. Civil disobedience is to refuse to obey a law that is unjust. What's an example of an unjust law? What if, I've got the perfect one. We're thinking World War II and the Nazis. And during World War II in Germany, it was illegal to help Jews. Absolutely illegal to help Jews. This kind, loving, wonderful person that I am hiding Jews in the attic of my house. I'm hiding them and I'm helping them. I'm feeding them and giving them water and giving them a place to live and to hide. Well, Nazi soldiers show up banging on my door and they ask me, have you seen any Jews? It is the law that I must say, yes, I have Jews in my attic. But I know that if I say that, they're going to send those Jews off to a concentration camp. They're going to be tortured, probably killed. And so I break the law and I say, nope, haven't seen any Jews around here. I don't know. Well, that is civil disobedience. How about there are laws? Let's say here in Almaty, there's a law that Koreans are not allowed to eat in restaurants. There's a law that says Koreans are not allowed to eat in restaurants. And so I gather all of you Korean students, every one of you that's Korean. I take every one of you and we go and walk into a restaurant and we sit down at a table and we get a menu and we insist on eating there. That is civil disobedience because that law That's a horrible law. Who would make a law saying Koreans aren't allowed to eat in our restaurant? Racist people would. Laws like this exist around the world. I don't know if they really exist about Koreans, but different ethnic groups are not allowed to participate in the government, are not allowed to eat in restaurants. But if you refuse to obey that law because the law is unjust, that is civil disobedience. You are breaking the law, but it's for a good purpose. Civil disobedience. And Gandhi was really, really big into civil disobedience. And so all through the 1920s and the 1930s, there were anti-British protests all over India. People were so tired of them. And some people were doing civil disobedience. And Gandhi came up with this great idea. Gandhi said they should boycott British goods. To boycott means to refuse to buy. So, because even though you're in India, when you go into the supermarket, everything is British goods. You have to buy British salt, British candies, British tea, all this stuff from Britain. And Gandhi said we should boycott British goods and we should only buy Indian goods. Well, there was one good in particular that Gandhi took a stand on, and that was salt. The British government had a monopoly on salt. Hopefully you all remember what a monopoly is. And a monopoly is the British government controlled all the salt in India. If you were in the entire nation of India and you bought salt, you were buying salt from the British. And Gandhi said, let's stop this. And he, on March 12th, 1930, Gandhi set out on foot to walk 386 kilometers all the way to the ocean, because he was going to make a point and he was going to make his own salt. So he walked, and he began with 78 followers, 78 people that supported him and said, okay, I'm going to do this walk with you. And 386 kilometers is a long time. They would walk through these little villages and they would tell people what they were doing. And by the time he got to the ocean on April 6th, 1930, he arrived at the ocean. He had thousands of people walking with him. They were all doing this pilgrimage to the sea. Gandhi did this big dramatic thing where he walked into the ocean. He reached into the water, grabbed out a handful of like salty sand and was like, I have salt, let's make salt. And he did. And he started this massive movement all across India. Indians started making their own salt. Indians stormed into salt factories and said, we run this place now. This is our salt factory. Thousands of people, thousands of Indian people were selling salt off their carts on the side of the road. All of this was illegal. So the British government arrested and imprisoned Gandhi. They put him in prison for making salt. They imprisoned tens of thousands of Indians just for selling salt. This was a massive nationwide movement of civil disobedience. And it didn't look very good on Britain because it was written about in the newspapers all around the world. And so all around the world, Britain was being written about. Britain imprisons man for selling salt off the side of the road. Britain imprisons man for going to sea and making salt. Britain imprisons the head of the Congress Party over salt. And the whole world is looking at Britain like, why are you being such jerks? These people are just trying to make salt. Why are you being so awful to them? So they didn't, it stops here. My lecture on India. Britain is looking really, really bad, but they're still controlling India and refusing to give up. So that's India post-World War I. Now we're going to do Japan post-World War I. Japan, during World War I, had great economic growth, huge industry. Remember, they were partnered up with the Allies. And so France and Britain and Italy and Russia, they were buying things from Japan. And they kept building more factories so that they could make more stuff, so they could sell more to their friends. And Japan was really growing. And they also they were taking control of more lands. They did this thing called the 21 demands. They gave a list of 21 demands to China, saying, you have to obey each of these things or we're going to conquer you. And China really gave in to a whole bunch of them. We're going to talk more about the 21 demands later, so I'm just going to leave it at that. And they had taken over all the lands that used to be German territories, and part of that was a territory in northeastern China, and then a whole bunch of islands in the Pacific Ocean. So they were growing economically and imperializing, getting bigger. In the 1920s, there was a big liberal push in Japan. The young people started not necessarily supporting the old ways anymore. They didn't want to be old-fashioned and traditional. They were looking at the West. They were looking at the United States. They were looking at Western Europe, and they were wanting to modernize. And that was kind of freaking out their grandparents. They didn't like that so much. But this Japanese progression of imperializing, colonizing, getting really rich, making their army bigger, was hurting their relationship with the West, because the West, they were okay with Japan when they were like cute little Japan, and they helped them out in their war, and that's great. Yeah, sure, we like you, Japan. Let's be friends. But when Japan suddenly started getting bigger and bigger and more powerful, yeah, the West didn't like them so much anymore. They started seeing them as more of a competitor than a cute little friend. So these relationships were really, really important to Japan to maintain good, healthy, positive relationships with the West. So they made some deals. They agreed to give up their control of that the northeastern region of China. They gave up that control. They gave it back to China. They that's Shandong. Shandong was the region of China. This is not to scale, you all know that, but if this is China and Japan is over here, Shandong was about here, and Japan had controlled this. They gave this back to China. They also agreed to limit their navy. They agreed they wouldn't let their navy become really, really big, and overall totally reduce spending on their military. So if they don't make their military too big for the West to feel like they might be an enemy, then everybody was okay. And then it went back to, okay, everybody's friends. We're all friends now. We're modernizing. We're becoming more Western. Well, then 1929, what happened in 1929? In 1929 was the Great Depression. It began in the US, but it spread all over the world. The same thing happened in Japan, as we talked about what happened in Latin America. Economies just were destroyed. Japan had been growing and growing and growing and thriving. And suddenly everything comes to a halt and things are looking really bad for Japan. And when that happened, nationalism grew, except in Japan, their particular nationalism was to an insane level. It was so insane, it has its own word, which is ultra-nationalism. Ultra-nationalism began in Japan. These people were like nationalism times a million. And these ultra-nationalists, lots of them were in the military, and they were angry with the government. They were angry with the government for how they felt that the government had caved into the West. The West wanted us to lower our military, to reduce our military, so we did. The West wanted us to give that land back to China, and so we did. And they're like, what? The West isn't our boss. We control ourselves. And these ultra-nationalists wanted to go back to colonizing and imperializing and making Japan a great empire. And when they did it, they did this crazy thing called the Manchurian incident. The Manchurian incident was in 1931. In 1931, ultra-nationalist Japanese military leaders went to Manchuria, which is in northern China. Absolutely, have to remember, it's in northern China. Ultra-nationalists from the military went to this area in China and blew up Japanese railroads. Okay, Japanese soldiers blew up Japanese railroads that were running through a part of China. And then they blamed it on the Chinese. So Japanese soldiers blew up Japanese railroads, but then they blamed it on the Chinese. And they said, oh, Chinese people blew up our Japanese railroads. And then they were lying. But in defense of Japan, They went in and fought against Chinese soldiers, won, took control of this entire Manchurian region and turned it into a fake puppet state. You guys need to know what a puppet state is. A puppet state, imagine a marionette puppet, you know, the kind where the puppeteers stand like this and the puppet underneath moves. So these Japanese military leaders were the hands, and the puppet that had a crown on his head and was the leader of the nation of Manchuria was the last emperor of China. The guy that had been before, they took him and put him as the head, and his name is Puyi. They put him as the head of Manchuria, even though it was all led by Japan, by these ultra-nationalists. Well, the government of Japan was not happy with this at all. No one had asked the government. No one had talked to the government about it at all. And suddenly, these rogue military leaders were doing invasions and takeovers of Chinese land in the name of Japan. Japanese government, very upset. But the people of Japan supported the ultranationalists and didn't support the government. And so the government flip-flopped and said, all right, okay, fine, we're okay with this, and because the government has to keep the support of the people. And when the League of Nations got really upset with Japan over the Manchurian incident. And so what did they do? Japan quit. Japan said, we're not a member of the League of Nations anymore. We're done. And also, Japan backed out of all those agreements they had made before in the 20s. Everything they told the West, they said, we're not going to try to make our empire any bigger. We're not going to colonize anymore. We promise we won't make our military too big. We promise we won't make our Navy too big. Well, they backed out of all those promises. They no longer exist. And ultra-nationalism grew and grew and grew and became this big movement in Japan. The way they helped to do that was, first off, the government is made up of civilians. All of us, you, me, we're all civilians. Civilians are people that are not in the military. The only way the government survived was they agreed to just be led by the military. The military controlled everything at this point. Even though there was a government, they always had to look to the military and ask permission from the military before they did anything. They started, anyone that had socialist ideas or democratic ideas were either killed or imprisoned. Got rid of them. Anyone that disagreed with them, anyone that wasn't an ultra-nationalist was imprisoned or killed. So now ultra-nationalism is spreading even more and more. And they indoctrinated children by teaching ultra-nationalism in school. They said, well, this is right. And when children learn it, that's all they know. I mean, it's the same for you guys. If you had been taught in school since you were 3 years old that, I don't know, I want to make up something wild, but it doesn't matter what. If you've been taught something in school every day, year after year after year, that it's true, you're going to believe it. If you had been taught, I mean, in America, we have almost ultranationalism, and US children are taught that America is number one. America is best. The United States is the best country ever. Yay, America number one. We're taught that. And so people grow up to believe that the United States of America is the best country on earth. Well, other countries are taught that too. Like French people, no, French really aren't. Where I lived in Benin, in West Africa, they are taught from early childhood that their country is the best country on earth. I met people there. Now remember, Benin is the 16th poorest nation on earth. When I lived there, we didn't even have paved roads. It was all dirt roads, extreme abject poverty. And I met people that said they wouldn't even go to the United States if their trip was free, because they don't need to, because Benin is the best place on earth. And the Japanese, so that's nationalism. The Japanese did all of that, but to an extreme. And that was ultra nationalism. And they taught it in schools. And they brought back, well, they didn't bring back, Japan had had an emperor, but the emperor had always just kind of, not always, but for a while, the emperor had just kind of sat in the background and been a leader. But these ultra nationalists threw the emperor up to the front of society and created this cult around the emperor. The emperor is a god, and the emperor can do no wrong, and just, he was god-like. And that emperor, Hirohito, there was a whole cult around him. And it was a whole form of getting the entire country thinking in the same way. Everyone thinks the same. Everyone believes Japan is the best, and we are led by a god. In the 1930s, there was a civil war going on in China. And because the Chinese were fighting with each other, Japan, these ultra-nationalist military leaders, saw that as a perfect opportunity. They thought, China is weak because they're fighting a civil war. We're going to take them over. And Japan wanted to colonize China, take over the entire nation. And the only reason that they failed at that is because while they were attempting to take over China, World War II broke out. And Japan got involved in World War II, which took away their effort in China. And in World War II, they joined, Japan joined Germany and Italy. They signed the Tripartite Pact. Sorry, I'm gonna put that on a new page. So the Tripartite Pact. A pact is an agreement with Germany and Italy. So it was Germany, Italy, and Japan. And they made the Axis powers. And when they started fighting in World War II, it took away from all the efforts they had been putting on trying to colonize China. That's it. Bye.